In this next module, we're going to talk about parallelism, which means writing sentences in parallel structure. Pairs of ideas that are joined by and, or but should be written in parallel form. That means that the two parts have to follow the same grammatical structure. Here's an example. The velocity decreased by 50%, but the pressure decreased by only 10%. So we've got subject-verb, velocity decreased, and then subject-verb, pressure decreased. I'm going to refer you here to another good writing reference. I borrowed this example from The Essentials of Writing Biomedical Papers by Mimi Zeiger. This is an excellent reference that's specifically on scientific writing, so I'll just point that out to you now. Here's another example of pairs of ideas that are joined by and, or but. You would say, we aimed to increase the resolution and to improve picture quality. So we get infinitive phrase and infinitive phrase. Those pairs of ideas must be written in parallel form like this. Besides pairs of ideas, lists of ideas also need to be written in parallel form. This means that all items in the list should have the same grammatical structure. Here's another example from Strunk and White. The first version is not parallel. It says, locusts denuded fields in Utah, rural Iowa was washed away by torrents, and in Arizona the cotton was shriveled by the placing heat. That's unparalleled because all the items in the list have different constructions. Locusts denuded, that's subject-verb. Rural Iowa was washed away, that's in the passive voice. In Arizona, that's a prepositional phrase. To make this sentence parallel, you can make all the items in the list follow subject-verb. So you can say, locusts denuded fields in Utah, torrents washed away rural Iowa, and blazing heat shriveled Arizona's cotton. All of those follow subject-verb. Parallelism means that you have to make a choice for the structure and stick with it. Here's an example of a sentence that's nicely in parallel structure. It says, NASA's intrepid Mars rover Curiosity has been through a lot in the past year. It flew 354 million miles, blasted through the Mars atmosphere, deployed a supersonic parachute, unfurled a giant sky crane, and touched down gently on the surface of Mars. Notice that in that second sentence, it's got a list of things, and they're all parallel. They all follow the same structure. We've got it flew, blasted, deployed, unfurled, and touched down. So everything in that list starts with a verb. Also, notice the really nice verbs in this sentence. It flew, it blasted, it deployed, it unfurled, touched down gently. Those are lovely verbs. Here's another example of a sentence that's not in parallel form. If you want to be a good doctor, you must study hard, critically think about the medical literature, and you should be a good listener. You can hear that sounds funny when you read it out loud. The first two items in the list are verbs, study and think, but the placement of the adverb is different. The final item in the list actually shifts from a you must to a you should be. To make these parallel, you could make them all imperatives. You could say, if you want to be a good doctor, you must study hard, listen well, and think critically about the medical literature. Or you could also make them all into nouns. You could say, if you want to be a good doctor, you must be a good student, a good listener, and a critical thinker. All right, another example of an unparalleled sentence. This research follows 4 distinct phases. 1, establishing measurement instruments. 2, pattern measurement. 3, developing interventions. And 4, the dissemination of successful interventions to other settings and institutions. Notice we've got establishing and developing, those match. But then we have measurement and dissemination. Those 2 match, but all 4 don't match. To make them all match, we could turn them all into gerunds, that is, words ending in ing. So you could say, this research follows 4 distinct phases: establishing, measuring, developing, and disseminating. When writing lists, always go back and double check that your lists are parallel. This kind of mistake is quite common. I'm going to do one practice example here. If you'd like to test yourself, you could pause the video now and attempt to get this into parallel structure on your own. Otherwise, I'll just lead you through it. This one reads, Bates describes the 5 principles for the success of decision support systems in clinical settings: speed, real-time delivery, integration into workflow, simplicity, and to avoid data entry. You can hear the non-parallel structure when you read that one out loud. We have all nouns, speed, delivery, simplicity, until the last item where we get an infinitive phrase, to avoid. This one's actually fairly simple to fix. You just have to turn everything into nouns. So you could say, Bates describes the 5 principles: speed, real-time delivery, integration into workflow, simplicity, and the avoidance of data entry. Now these are all nouns.